All right, welcome back to the deep dive right here on LexTalk.
Hey, everyone.
We are kicking off season 7, episode 2. And wow, it feels great to be back digging into English and linguistics with you all.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this one.
You know that feeling, right? Maybe you're teaching or learning or just, out in the world, and communication just sort of stalls. Hits a cultural speed bump
Mhm.
where the words seem okay, but the actual meaning or maybe the feeling behind it just doesn't quite land.
Yeah, that disconnect, that's often where cultural awareness or maybe the lack of it really shows up. Language is just so much more than the words themselves, isn't it?
It really is, and that's exactly what we're getting into today. We've been looking through some really insightful material, some practical notes, guidance for educators.
And also some really interesting excerpts from a bigger guide, all about teaching cultural awareness, specifically in English language classrooms.
Right, and these sources, they really build a strong case, don't they?
They do. They argue pretty convincingly that, fostering cultural awareness isn't some kind of optional extra. It's actually fundamental if you want learners to truly use English effectively, especially now, with how connected everything is.
Totally agree. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack all that. We want to pull out the practical strategies, the sort of core ideas.
And those key insights, yeah,
Yeah,
about how teachers can go beyond just the grammar and vocab.
exactly. To help students become, properly culturally aware communicators.
It's about giving learners the tools to kind of bridge that gap between the language itself and the culture it operates in, making communication not just correct, but actually effective
Yeah.
and respectful too.
Okay, let's dive right in then. When we say cultural awareness in a classroom, what are we actually talking about? I think most people's first thought is maybe like festivals, food,
Mm.
traditional clothes.
Yeah, the visible stuff. And the sources definitely acknowledge that's part of it, but they push much deeper, much faster.
Right.
The real core idea here is that cultural awareness is um, fundamentally about understanding the perspectives, the values, the sort of underlying behaviors that shape how people from different backgrounds communicate and, well, interact. It's the invisible stuff driving the conversation.
So, less about what someone eats for breakfast and more about why they might phrase a request in a particular way.
Precisely. And one of the points the sources really hammer home, which feels a bit counterintuitive maybe, is that real cultural awareness, it doesn't start with understanding other people.
Oh, where does it start then?
It starts with understanding yourself,
Yeah.
with awareness of your own cultural lens, your own biases, assumptions, values, behaviors, because
Yeah.
that's the filter, right? The filter you use to see and interpret everything else.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. You can't really grasp how others might see things differently until you understand your own starting point.
Exactly.
The sources mention something interesting linked to this idea of cultural humility versus cultural confidence.
Yes. That's a great distinction they make. Cultural confidence sounds good, right? Like you get other cultures.
Mm.
But the sources sort of frame it as potentially limiting. It can imply you've kind of figured it all out.
Right, like job done.
Whereas cultural humility,
Right.
that's presented as much more valuable. It means you approach differences always ready to learn, being open, and crucially, recognizing that you don't know everything. You probably never will. It's about staying curious, not aiming for certainty.
I really like that. That ongoing learning vibe feels much more realistic for, well, life, really. And the sources are just crystal clear about how intertwined language and culture are, almost inseparable.
They really emphasize that language isn't just a neutral code. It's shaped by culture, and it also shapes how we perceive and express things. They touch on ideas like cultural schemas.
Schemas, like mental blueprints.
Yeah, kind of like the mental scripts our culture gives us for understanding situations, like what's normal when you order coffee or greet a stranger, that kind of thing. And they also mention linguistic relativity.
The idea that the language you speak might subtly influence how you think or see the world?
Exactly that idea. It suggests the very structure or vocabulary might carry cultural baggage, so to speak.
Wow, okay, so these aren't just like abstract academic ideas, they have real consequences for communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If students don't get the cultural context, they can use perfect grammar, perfect vocabulary, and still cause confusion, maybe even offense, or just fail to connect properly.
Okay, that lays a really strong foundation. So the big question then is why? Why is focusing specifically on this cultural awareness piece so important for someone learning English today? What are the actual benefits the sources point out?
Well, they outline several key reasons. First, just on a personal level for the student, it builds empathy
Yeah.
and real curiosity. Instead of reacting to difference with, like confusion or even judgment.
Which is easy to do.
It is. They learn to approach it with interest, like, oh, that's different, I wonder why. Seeing it as a chance to learn to connect.
That shift in mindset alone feels huge.
It really is. And then on a practical level, it's just vital for preventing miscommunication.
Yeah.
The sources stress this point. A lot of the problems learners have aren't actually grammar mistakes. They're pragmatic mistakes,
Okay.
cultural mistakes.
Pragmatic. You mean using language appropriately for the social situation?
Exactly. Saying the right words, but maybe with the wrong tone, or being too direct or not direct enough
Yeah.
for that specific cultural interaction. Understanding the norms helps avoid those slip-ups. And, really importantly, it helps avoid accidentally reinforcing stereotypes.
Right, avoiding those cringe moments or worse, actually offending someone. Got it.
And then thinking bigger picture, this kind of learning feeds directly into global citizenship education. I mean, in today's world, being able to understand and navigate different cultural perspectives isn't just nice to have, it's a fundamental skill, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So learning English with this awareness isn't just about, say, passing an exam. It's prep for the real world.
That's it. And finally, there's a benefit right there in the classroom dynamics. The sources note it actually boosts student motivation and engagement.
House.
Well, when students see how the language connects to real people, real situations, understanding the world, they just get more invested in learning it. It feels more relevant.
Okay, and this is where we get that really concrete example from the sources, relevant for our LexTalk listeners here in Thailand, right? About disagreement.
Yes, this is such a good illustration because it comes up all the time. The sources point out that in some cultural contexts, and typical Thai communication is often mentioned here, direct disagreement might be less common or handled very indirectly to kind of maintain harmony.
Keep things smooth.
Right.
Mm.
But in many English-speaking contexts, maybe especially North American ones, the source notes, there are sort of expected, culturally preferred ways to disagree politely, but still quite directly.
So instead of just maybe a subtle hint or staying quiet, the expectation is more like you should actually voice your different view, but wrap it up nicely.
Precisely. The sources give examples. Learners need more than just, I disagree. They need phrases like, I see your point, but have you thought about? Or, that's interesting, however, from my perspective. Things like that.
Ah, so learning those phrases isn't just vocab practice, it's learning the cultural script for how to disagree without causing offense in that context.
Exactly. If a Thai learner, for example, only learns the English words for disagree, but applies their own cultural script of maybe avoiding direct confrontation, they could come across as maybe unengaged or even passive in a discussion where that direct but polite input is the norm.
I can see that.
And conversely, if they try to be direct using a literal translation without understanding the politeness conventions, they might accidentally sound blunt or rude. It just perfectly shows why you can't really separate the culture from the language.
Wow, that really makes it clear. Okay, so the why is definitely established. Let's shift to the how. What kind of practical strategies, activities do the sources actually recommend for teaching this effectively in an English class?
Okay, yeah, the material is packed with ideas here. They suggest starting simple, maybe just with some reflective questions.
Like what?
Things like asking students, how would you normally handle situation X in your culture? Or how might you feel if someone said Y to you this way? Just getting them thinking about their own assumptions first. It's low pressure.
Starting inward, then looking outward. Makes sense.
Exactly. Then from there, more active stuff, role plays, cultural simulations.
Yeah.
Those are great for practicing navigating those tricky real-world interactions.
Like maybe acting out that polite disagreement scenario we just talked about.
Perfect example. Or maybe practicing how to give or receive compliments, handle invitations, manage different levels of formality. All those areas where cultural norms can really differ. And the sources really push for using authentic materials.
Meaning stuff not specifically made for language learners, real-world things.
Yeah, exactly. Real movie scenes, songs, bits from social media, literature extracts, news clips. These aren't just sources of language, they're cultural texts, right?
Yeah.
They show language being used in context.
So students analyze not just the words, but maybe body language, the setting.
The relationship between the speakers, the hidden cultural assumptions.
Yeah.
The materials themselves become a window.
That's powerful.
Absolutely. Another big strategy they highlight is actually connecting students with people from different backgrounds.
How? Like guest speakers?
That's one way.
Oh,
Or setting up maybe pen pal exchanges or online interactions. The sources even specifically mention things like formal virtual exchange programs. sometimes called CILE,
TIL. What's that?
Collaborative Online International Learning. Basically, students in different countries work together online on a project.
Wow, okay. Working with international peers online? That sounds like an amazing way to get real interaction and actually apply this cultural learning.
It really is.
Yeah.
And technology obviously is a huge help here, using social media carefully for analysis. And interestingly, the sources even speculate about using AI, maybe chatbots, in the future to simulate conversations with different cultural styles for practice.
Using AI for cultural role play, that's definitely looking ahead. And what about something simple for teachers who are, really busy?
Ah, yes. They mentioned this great little idea called culture capsules.
Culture capsules. Sounds intriguing.
It's basically just committing to, say, 5 minutes at the start of class to share a quick cultural fact or a short story, maybe surprising statistic about culture and communication.
Oh, I like that. Bite-sized.
Exactly. It keeps cultural awareness on the radar consistently without needing a whole separate unit, just little regular reminders.
Okay, so we've got the definition, the why it matters, and lots of practical how-to ideas. But, the sources are realistic too. They admit this isn't always straightforward. What about the challenges? Especially around sensitive stuff like stereotypes and bias.
Yeah, this is obviously a critical area, but it needs careful handling. The sources really stress that tackling stereotypes means building critical thinking skills.
How do you do that?
It means teaching students to look closely at those authentic materials we mentioned, ads, news articles, even textbook dialogues, and not just understand the language, but actively look for underlying stereotypes, biases, or maybe overgeneralizations.
So questioning the messages they're receiving.
Exactly. And having explicit discussions about things like the danger of the single story, you know, reducing a whole group of people to one simple narrative,
Mm.
and talking about media bias. And the sources strongly warn against tokenism.
Tokenism, meaning like asking one student to speak for their entire culture.
Precisely. Or using one example to represent a hugely diverse group. It's about avoiding those simplistic representations.
That feels really important for making the classroom feel safe and respectful.
It is. And they even suggest a really cool activity. Give students a piece of text or an image they identify as biased and have them work together to rewrite or redesign it to be more culturally nuanced and inclusive.
Oh, nice. That gets them actively involved in fixing the problem, not just pointing it out.
Right? Moves them from just observing to critically engaging. Now, thinking about the actual classroom atmosphere, how else do the sources suggest creating a space where this kind of learning can really happen, where students feel safe?
Yeah, what's key there?
Well, it really starts with valuing the students' own cultural identities, making the classroom a place where they feel comfortable sharing their own perspectives, their backgrounds, which ties back to using diverse materials, right? Making sure the stuff you use reflects a range of voices and experiences, not just, say, British or American ones.
So the materials themselves should model the inclusivity you're trying to build.
Exactly. And here's another neat practical tip from the sources, encouraging students to create something called culture boards.
Culture boards.
Mhm.
Tell me more.
They're basically visual displays like posters or digital presentations where students represent their own identity, their language, traditions, what culture means to them. It's a great way for students to share their own stories and learn from each other, building that mutual respect right there in the classroom.
That sounds fantastic, making the diversity in the room visible and something to celebrate.
It really helps build that sense of community. Of course, the sources are realistic. They also mention the bigger challenges, things like teachers needing to be aware of their own potential unconscious biases,
Always tricky.
and sometimes navigating school rules or curriculum demands that maybe don't explicitly make space for this kind of deeper cultural learning.
So it's not just about the lesson plan, it's about the whole ecosystem, the teacher's awareness, the school's priorities.
Right. It's systemic, too. And, while we've mostly talked practical stuff, the sources do briefly acknowledge the theory behind all this.
Yeah, they mention names and models, right?
Yeah.
Like Byram, Bennett, Hofstede, people who've developed models of intercultural competence, showing there's real academic thinking behind this.
Exactly. And they link it back to core ideas from sociolinguistics and pragmatics, the study of language and use. Things like speech acts, the idea that we do things with words, like apologizing or requesting. And politeness theory, referencing people like Brown and Levinson, which explores how we use language to manage relationships across cultures.
Okay, so understanding a bit of that theory helps explain why those practical strategies, like teaching specific phrases for polite disagreement, actually work and are necessary. It gives the why behind the how.
Precisely. It grounds the classroom practice in a deeper understanding without needing everyone to become a linguistics expert.
Okay, so stepping back from this whole deep dive, what's the main message here? It seems incredibly clear that cultural awareness isn't just some minor detail in learning English.
No, not at all. The sources frame it as absolutely core. Like we said, language and culture are two sides of the same coin. You can't really get good at using the language effectively in the real world without engaging with the cultural side, too.
And by making this a priority, by fostering that reflection, that curiosity, empathy, critical thinking educators are doing more than just teaching English rules.
Yeah, they're helping shape culturally competent global citizens, people who are better equipped to navigate our incredibly diverse world with understanding, respect, and just more effectiveness.
So for you listening, maybe you're an English teacher here in Thailand or somewhere else. Maybe you're a parent helping your child learn. Maybe you're learning English yourself, or maybe you're just fascinated by language and culture. This stuff is really valuable, isn't it?
Definitely. It just gives you a richer way to understand communication and hopefully helps you navigate our complex world a little better.
The sources touch on some ongoing challenges, like handling sensitive topics and the future role of culture, especially with tech changing things so fast, which leaves us with a final thought to chew on.
Yeah, consider this. English keeps evolving as this global lingua franca, connecting countless cultures, and technology lets us interact instantly with people all over the world. So how do we strike the right balance? How do we balance the need to understand, say, the cultural norms often associated with dominant English-speaking countries like the US or UK, which often feature heavily in teaching materials, with the equally vital need to respect, integrate, and genuinely give voice to all the diverse local cultures where English is used every single day? How do we make sure cultural learning in the English classroom is truly global and inclusive, not just focused on one or two centers?
That's a really important question. Definitely something to keep thinking about. And that wraps up this deep dive. And that brings us to the end of Season 7, Episode 2 of Lex Talk. We really hope this deep dive gave you some useful things to think about regarding cultural awareness and language learning and teaching.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We always enjoy exploring these topics with you all.
We'll be back soon with more. But in the meantime, please don't forget to follow Lex Talk. We're on all the platforms: our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Just search for @LexTalk Podcast.
Yep, at LexTalk Podcast everywhere. See you next time.
Let's talk, let's learn, let's Lex Talk.